Okay, I believe we are live and recording.
That's a new notice.
Oh. There we go.
Okay. Happy 2024, everybody. I feel like I haven't seen you this January. All right, I call to order this March 14th, 2024 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:03. That clock is still wrong, 6:03 p.m. We have in attendance tonight, all 5 of our planning commissioners. Carolyn Conant is here remotely. Miles Lofton is here in chambers. Jill Tatton, myself, Kai Marienfeld, and Mikkel Layton are all here in person, as well as city staff. In the audience, we also have Michael, our, what is your actual title?
Community development.
Okay, I was like, the guy that does all this stuff. Community Development Director. We have our City Council Liaison, Luke Wojciechowski, and then we have Christina Sloan, who I assume is here on behalf of the applicant for our action item this evening. All right. First item of business is approval of minutes from our January 25th, 2024 regular meeting. Has anyone had a chance to review those, and do we have any comments, additions, changes, or we can hear a motion as well?
I went ahead and looked through them.
All right.
Good to me.
I'll
Okay.
make one comment
Yes.
for Eve. From the original draft, I just made one minor amendment from DRT representing development review team, not design review team.
Oh.
Super minor, but just snuck it in there.
Good to know. Thank you, Corey.
Cool.
Anybody want to?
I guess I'll go ahead and motion to approve the minutes from our January 2024 meeting,
Or January which date?
the 24th, right? 25th.
All right.
January 25th, 2024.
Yes. Great. Motion, a second?
I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay, motion from Miles and a second by Jill. Any discussion before we take a vote? And Carolyn, please feel free to just say anything to draw attention to yourself if you'd like to chime in at some point. All right. Okay, we can just do an all in favor. We have a motion to approve the minutes in a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion passes unanimously. Minutes approved. Okay, on to our first and only action item for the evening, 4.1. Nope, I'm so sorry. Our first of 2 action items for the evening. 4.1, which is approval of our 2024 regular planning commission meeting schedule. There's a document attached. It is nothing that you would not expect. I don't even think we attempted to calendar any joint meetings this year.
Nope.
So
They are listed as needed, so we'll let the city council direct when those would be opportune. But at the moment, we're just going to schedule all regular meetings.
Great.
As default.
all right. Luke, you're just the only city council member we ever get to talk to. All right. Any other notes about that particular agenda item from staff?
Nope, nothing special.
Okay.
Sorry it's taken this long for us to get it approved.
No, that's okay. We only
sh-
had one meeting before this.
Right, sure.
So, yes. Yeah, look at all these regular meetings we didn't have.
Right.
In that case, I'll just make it easy. I move to approve our 2024 regular planning commission meeting schedule.
I'll second that.
Okay, that was my motion. Second from Miles. Any further discussion? Any glaring issues? All right, we can just do an all in favor again, if that's all right. All in favor of approving our regular planning commission meeting schedule for 2024? Aye.
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 Okay, my motion passes. Meeting schedule set. That was 5-0 as well. Okay, now on to action item 4.2. Consideration and possible approval of planning resolution 02-2024, a planning resolution approving the major change amendment to the approved remanded level 2 site plan for the Cottonwood condominiums 2023 on property located at 214 South, 200 East, Moab, Utah 84532. This is a briefing and a possible action. There are many documents and exhibits that are attached to the agenda for both public review and also for members of the planning commission to look at. Ready for you.
Before we engage, I don't know how quickly we may have passed through this. I might have been
Yep.
too committed about our citizens to be heard. Did we move beyond the citizens to be heard?
No, I actually never mentioned it, so
Okay.
we should do that.
So
Yeah,
let's maybe engage in that. And we did have some
my
chamber.
brain skipped right to meeting minutes. Backing up then, I'm going to jump back up to agenda item number 2, which is citizens to be heard. So this is for items that are not on the agenda typically. However, I am more than willing to allow anyone who might be here to speak on any item that we have on our action item list tonight, just in the interest of public engagement and transparency. There's one more person that entered chambers after we introduced people who were here. Were you hoping to say anything at Citizens to be Heard? Okay, great. Okay, cool. If that changes, please let us know. We do not have anybody here in chambers who is hoping to speak at Citizens to be Heard. I don't believe there's someone online. But we did receive an email relating to our action item 4.2 tonight, which we can bring up when we're discussing that item, if that's all right with everyone. Great. And I have a printed copy of that email, actually.
Great.
Just for ease and also to hand to you. Y'all have it, but if anyone wanted to review it in person too, that's fine.
That's good.
Okay, back to
Yeah,
that.
and there was nothing else submitted online for citizens to be heard, so. we're
Great.
good.
Thank you for
Back-
flagging that,
to
Corey.
the item.
Sorry about that, y'all.
Alrighty, well, we can, if we're ready, just hop right back in where I interjected. We'll go ahead and open into staff presentation on the item. Like I said, many windows to shuffle through. Give me a moment, I'm so
Fine.
sorry. So the way I'm hoping to structure the discussion tonight is to walk through a briefing of the item specific to what the proposal is advancing, and then maybe move into the shift of the public comment that was submitted for testimony by the adjacent property owner. And then open up for an opportunity for the applicant and applicant team to make some additional comments and then file into discussion at that point. So there'll be variable tiers of discussion, and I'm thinking maybe we'll try to coordinate that and leave some of those main points. So please do take notes throughout the presentation, just hopefully move that quick, and then can always go back to reference materials
Great.
As we engage. So, sorry, I think we might have this in the way of folks. May not go away. All right. So the major change amendment proposed to the Cottonwood condominium is approved remanded site plan level 2. This is the property located at 214 South, 200 East. Property owners Gary Snook and applicant representing Christina Sloan is in the R3 residential multi-household zone district, looking to make some structural amendments to the approved 9-unit condominium project. So it's the multi-household project that's been approved. The condominium platting has not been approved yet, but has been filed as an application. The background on this, which was included in the packet, was quite extensive. We've been through a number of different approval points throughout this use approval, ranging back to August 11th, 2022. Oh, Carolyn is the host now.
It's a coup.
I don't quite know how that would have happened. Sorry, one, give me a second. See if we can't
I mean, I trust Carolyn.
get you back.
I
here.
didn't do it, I promise.
My laptop, who was the host, dropped off the Zoom.
Ah.
So Carolyn, hopefully you don't have to let me in to the meeting.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Right back where we left off. Hi, everybody.
It's okay.
The sheet.
I know, I love
Yeah.
your background.
Alrighty, back to our approvals. The original approval for the site plan and then advancing into building permit approval. Following that building permit approval, the appeal application was filed by the adjacent neighbor Keith Harger, who was the neighbor who's filed public comment tonight. During that period, it was evaluated that the applicants had some procedural noticing defects they wanted to cure just to eliminate that as a concern moving forward. That was brought back to the planning commission to cure those noticing defects. Planning commission reapproved that site plan on March 9th, 2023. The appeal process continued where the administrative law judge ALJ completed her determination and remanded the site plan back to planning commission with her described findings within that, where there were additional elements that the planning commission needed to make interpretation on. Planning commission executed that process, made the determinations in a findings and conclusions document as to what elements were acceptable within the buffering area, which was the major aspect of the appeal, is the content and elements accepted within the original buffering requirements, and that was completed July 14th, 2023. Along that process, and even prior to, the city staff and city council had been engaged in developing a water efficient landscaping ordinance for almost 2 years at that point. As an aspect of that was the screening, buffering, and other landscape requirements, obviously. But as those were brought through and finally approved as a part of ordinance 2023-08, in September of 2023, the applicants then were evaluating the continued development of their project. They engaged in the continuation of the building permit, the original building permit, to refine what would be their balcony structure, and then also how that would correspond to the improvements they would have to make for the landscaping provisions to essentially gain access to what that aspect of the improvement was. That was filed, the first change proposal, in December of this year, or excuse me, December of last year, 2023, and then revisions between the applicant team and DRT were filing out the project structure for a final material submittal of March 11th, 2024. At that point, submitting to the planning commission for review as the land use authority for major change amendments to the site plan as the original approval authority. Alrighty, and then I will let the applicant team maybe dive into this a bit further, but to very, very concisely summarize what it is that is being amended is the addition of 2 balconies on the upper center 2 units of the south side of the structure. There were balconies proposed as a part of the original site plan package, and then through the approval process and appeal process, it was more of a matter of to what extent those balconies could extend either into the buffering areas or into the setback areas. And then ultimately, with the remanded site plan approval, removed the balconies on these 2, what we'll call upper 2 center units. So there is a 3rd unit on the main floor, the ground level floor. So the balconies were just on these 2 units with a roof structure extending over the patio there. But those were all reduced back as a part of the remanded approval, and now are being proposed to reinstall those balconies in 2 outer units. My understanding is at this point not reinstall the roof in the center unit. We can check in with the applicant there, but that's the current understanding. The applicant is additionally amending the screening, buffering, and landscaping areas to incorporate those amendments. Essentially, as they were engaging with this structural extension, it required that through that ordinance and the landscaping standards, all those other additional elements come up into compliance as well. So as a small, could be considered a small structural amendment, but the improvements necessary were to come into full compliance with that 1710 chapter. What we're looking at here is that landscaping excerpt page from, well, this is the landscaping plan submitted. Their landscape architect provided for us in conjunction with their architect and civil engineer. That extends into, as they had improved their landscaping, they've also amended electively and by consequence of the changes, their civil and drainage designs to accommodate that buffering landscaping area requirement. So of particular note, the original drainage area being in this northwest quarter of that circulation area has been moved, and now the drainage system runs nearly the whole length of that west boundary while also adding vegetation landscaping, but removing the circulation hard surfacing area outside of that 8-foot buffer in that area. So that's one of the other more significant civil adjustments to the plan. So what will kind of, again, in a very simplistic perspective, break this amendment down into those 3 categories, but the impetus being the addition of the balcony structure. I've also included the architectural site plan. This is kind of the dominating approval material that we'd be evaluating. So it does have the call out sheets for the fencing, which is an aspect of the screening requirements for the landscaping, as well as, and I won't even attempt to zoom in at this point, but within the packet, everyone that's opening the sheet can have access to it, but does distinguish the heights, locations of those fences, which is the screen, but then also the setbacks and distances for the balconies being that 11.5 or 11 foot 5 inches from the property line. So again, just a quick reference back to what the updated buffering horizontal distance was for a standard buffer is 8 feet. And then of course, the matrix of materials that were required to be plant materials to be included in that buffering area, and then also a list of acceptable landscape elements that could be included in that buffering area as well. But yeah, there are some distinguishing dimensions and descriptions on this plan. They're just very, very, very small. I don't know why my computer isn't playing nice tonight. So when I click down, it wants to send us back to the background page. I apologize. This is another excerpt from the architectural plan showing the floor plans for level 1, level 2, and then the elevations of the north property. The particular element that I'm wanting to show here is that this is identifying those balcony areas. There's no roof line included on this. Those were extracted at this point. But yeah, the balcony pieces are corresponding correctly through this architectural plan, as well as referenced correctly in the civil plan and landscaping plan. This is one of the cut sheets from our civil plan. It's showing, and I think highlighting pretty clearly, the updated detention basin running along the west side of the property there, as well as the other improvements in drainage elements that were reviewed and incorporated in the civil design. That comes along with our Moab Irrigation Company irrigation line that has extending irrigation through this property onto the neighboring property. So that's been maintained as well through this plan. But yes, all along this south boundary is a component of that drainage system. Okay. And then just always like to throw the motion there just as a quick reference, but I think I'm going to go ahead and exit out of sharing this screen. I do have a couple other materials I'd like to share before turning it over to the review of the submitted comment. All right, Carolyn, don't steal my screen again. Okay. So there were a couple materials not included in the packet, but are on record. So I'm not concerned about the access to these. But this was the findings and conclusions report that was approved by Planning Commission following the approval of the remanded site plan. So this was an element that during the remanded plan that it was significant importance on what it was, the facts and findings that the planning commission was making in order to make that remanded approval. This is where those elements were profiled and able to be distinguished if we were to ever need to review them. I think it's going to be important to consider these elements as we begin to look at both the applicant's narrative as well as the public comment, as it is beginning to, I think, pull some of these elements back into question as far as what elements are acceptable within the landscape buffering area, the buffering area as landscape elements. This is, again, where we went through every item. I think there were a total of 9. It ended up being 8. 8 that ended up being within the original area. I don't believe that they're within the review. Any additional elements have been added, but some elements have increased, like plant material, but also the orientation of some of the structures meeting that of the wall. And I think that's really about it. Everything else is maintained as the same. It was just the structural elements being the balconies that are outside the buffering area. It was the main amendment here. But particular to what we're going to evaluate later, and we can always come back to this piece, was the hardscape crushed granite gravel path is a consideration that was, I think, profiled pretty significantly in the comment letter. And additionally, this was not shared. I think we will share this as we move through this item going forward, but this is the landscaping matrix for the Cottonwood Condos revised. So as staff approve any site plan, we go through the process of evaluating all code aspects that would apply to that plan. Does it meet the development standards? So we're doing, again, the way we frame this is our homework. This is showing you the math of how it is that we make our approvals or work with the applicant teams to come into compliance with whatever the standards are. But this is just showing the evidence of what those are. It's quite small. I will zoom in, but we won't spend too much time on each of these, other than the approval matrix that we've maintained through the previous approval sets has not changed. All we're doing here is adding this extra chapter, which is the landscaping chapter, to show how the elements that are being proposed as a part of this amendment do indeed comply with this new landscape ordinance. I'll read through the list just so we do have them on the record. Is where the required landscaping is required, landscaping materials, the right-of-way and private street trees, artificial plants, approved plant list materials, cool season turfs, mulch areas, water features, hydrozoning, standard buffering, this of course being one of the bigger elements here. And we can certainly come back to review this, but again, quick summary, there's essentially more than what is required as far as the material matrix that we've developed, in that the number of plants is either meeting or exceeding the requirements of that matrix. Again, landscaping plan required, irrigation system, and then landscaping water budget. We've also included permitted use area for the multi-household and setbacks in this. So I will.
Hey, Corey, could you go back just down a little? Just pause it there for 1 second. There's just something that caught my eye.
Sure. Which?
Next page.
Okay.
I think like the
Standard buffering area.
down. Sorry.
All right.
Where was parking?
Oh, right there.
Okay. That's it for me.
Okay. All right. I think those are all the materials I'm hoping to share for the moment. At this point, maybe turn it back to the chair to work through both what will be the public comment discussion I think we should have first, and then offer the applicant the opportunity to review and describe their narrative and justification.
And to clarify, we received a public comment email from the owner of the adjacent property who's been engaged throughout the process, who is the original appellant of the determination that was made for the reason for the remand, where we had to sort of clarify what was and what wasn't landscaping according to the old ordinance. We now have the new ordinance. And then we also received a reply from the applicant's attorney who is here tonight addressing some things in the public comment. That just came in though, if folks missed that. I just want to flag that for everybody. Yes,
So maybe breaking down what the public comment characterizes, it was 7 pages.
yes,
So we won't read that for the public body, but I believe the planning commission has had opportunity to review that
Yes.
in full. So maybe just in the quick summary, the neighbor Keith Harger goes through what is the history of and his participation in this process. And then throughout that profiling where he has a contest with what elements had been approved or had worked through the process, but ultimately concluding in that he does believe the intent of the ordinance was to not allow use elements, and I don't want to paraphrase, I think Keith's words should speak for their own, but essentially is the gravel path, for example, does not fall within the intent of the ordinance for a standard buffering area and what is to be included in that, and the fact that it is not the material that he is contesting, it is the use of a pathway being included in the buffering area. This is where, and where I'm referencing, I think, back to our findings and conclusions, is I believe that was the similar and same argument he was making at that time for the pathway that the
correct.
commission evaluated in a material and in intensity capacity. And the findings at that time is that that was acceptable within the original ordinance, and as we are reviewing it now, do not believe the 1710 amendments to that ordinance have changed in a way that would change the staff's recommendation on how that is to be interpreted.
Yes. So the staff, to clarify, the staff has made that determination. The planning commission has not yet decided if the new ordinance, if applied, would preclude
Correct.
that. So
Yep.
that is something that we need to.
This would be a findings,
Correct.
findings and conclusion element tonight.
Yeah.
That we have probably approved similar to how we have approved that in the past.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say the big picture about why the neighbor, Mr. Harger, is bringing up the pathway again is he reiterates that he did not agree with the conclusions that we made at our July meeting when we sort of went through the remanded order from the appeal authority and made those determinations, which is fine. But the reason he's bringing it up again is saying, okay, well, if you're going to apply the new ordinance does have some more specificity. And the new ordinance does potentially say something different and expresses a different intent. And so I say the crux of his argument is that you can't have your cake and eat it too. And so if you're going to apply the new ordinance in order to allow structural changes that maybe weren't allowed last time around, although that is something I also would like to talk about, you need to apply the language of the new ordinance, which might not be the same determination that you all made according to the old one. So I would say that is sort of the big overarching reason that those points that we have already made determinations on are being brought up again, because Mr. Harger believes that potentially it would change the outcome, the determination if the new landscaping ordinance applies. So.
Yep.
Yes.
very, very well said. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to start. This is all in the public record. This will be available. It is long, but most of it is the history sort of where we've got here, and then some disagreement with decisions that we, the appeal authority, and the staff made in the past. I would say that's sort of the crux of it, saying, okay, now you're asking for something under this ordinance, you need the ordinance to apply in full if you're doing a major site plan amendment. Is there anything else in there that's worth mentioning, I think, for our discussion?
I've read through it twice.
Yeah,
And that was the best summary I could get.
all right,
So I mean, again, Keith has an opportunity to
absolutely,
always apply testimony.
yes.
But
And
think that
one of
captures
the
it.
important things I think that he mentions is that he specifically did not appeal the remanded site plan that we agreed on in July of last year at our meeting for some reasons, including that it was done at that point. Surprised to see that it's back now and there's another sort of allowance that the applicant is asking for, or something new. And he was happy that the city was in the process of changing, the landscaping code to be a little clearer and less ambiguous. So, which he believed would, avoid the same conversation in the future. Anyone, please feel free to chime in if there's anything that stuck out to you that you think is relevant to the discussion tonight. But yes, I would encourage anyone to actually read that comment and to actually read the reply that the commission and city staff were sent from the applicants, and their attorney, which addresses, I think, some of the interpretation issues, with the new code. And I'm sure they can talk about that tonight as well.
What's the neighbor's property zoned?
Same.
R3 multi-household,
R3.
same zone.
Yep. So you have two properties zoned the same, so this is not a zone boundary buffer.
Correct.
Importantly, it's just a standard buffer, which is 8 feet now, whereas it was 15 feet.
When they applied, it was 15 feet.
When they applied, it was 15 feet. Correct?
Correct,
Okay.
15 feet, and then obviously
And they were
what the
approved at
purpose,
15 feet.
yeah, what the purpose of the original appeal was, is that there was a lot of additional language within the code that complicated how that 15 feet was meant to be integrated into
Mhm.
sites.
Right.
And that was a precedential level.
Yeah.
Years,
Yeah.
well, decades of reviews and approvals. However, after the determination from the ALJs that the 15 was a hard 15,
Mhm.
not negotiable on mitigation elements.
Mhm.
That the 15 was the 15, but what could be included with this in the 15 was up to the planning commission. and
Correct.
That was what essentially was the remanded aspect back to us for that finding and conclusions area.
And now they want an amended site plan.
Correct. So that maybe that's a fair point to go over right now, is that right now, the planning approval application under which it was originally applied
Mhm.
is where the major amendment process comes back in. So that was actually another section I was wanting to share. We can dive into that. Maybe now is a good time.
That was a good time.
Um,
And then
I'm just gonna be sharing the code. and
Corianne
walking
might
through the-
ask at that point if we could just establish distances for a few things then, just so everyone understands that even before we have the applicant's representative up. Just
Sure.
to make sure that we know how far in the first site plan in 2022, how far was the closest balcony from the property line?
Okay,
In the remanded site plan, how far was the closest balcony from the property line? Now, how far is the closest balcony from the property line under what they're asking for today?
Okay.
I think all
I
that's
can,
relevant
I
and
can
it's,
try to do
it's
that.
on here, but it's still a little unclear because the property line isn't actually included on all of the
Right,
illustrations for the site plan. And that was something I was trying to establish because it seems that nothing is in the buffer that is obviously other than the gravel path, which, Mr. Harger maintains that that's an inappropriate use of the buffer area.
Mhm.
But having already made that determination,
Mhm.
it does not appear that anything that is even being proposed for a change tonight would be within the buffer area.
That's correct.
Is anything within the setback area?
A 15-foot buffer area or an
No,
8-foot buffer
the
area?
current buffer area. And then I also want to make sure that we know if it was ever in the old buffer area.
Oh, I think we can walk through those.
Yeah, so just flagging to walk through that.
Yeah, currently nothing, there are no structural elements
Yes.
described outside of the approved landscaping elements that is within the buffering area or in the structural setback.
Yep.
They're all within what we consider the developable or buildable envelope
Mhm.
of the property. So I'll circle back to that to
Great.
revisit, but where we're at right now is within our municipal code structure under Title 17. under site plan review, which is again, the application of review that is accompanied by a planning resolution of approval, is if we scroll down through what would be the submittal requirements, criteria, review procedures, to amendment procedures. It also discusses lapse of site plan, but where we're at right now is essentially between these two elements, which is a minor change or major change process. Now, within these two language elements, sorry, probably harder to see when it's highlighted. There is what could be, in a visual perspective, is a bit of a Venn diagram of requirements. Meaning that depending on what exactly is being proposed, there are things that could potentially qualify as both a minor or major change. And this is an inadequacy in our code that we will shortly be fixing in our municipal rewrite. But for the moment, this is what the code reads. Staff's interpretation of this, a couple of elements, we decided it was more appropriate to process it as a major change, albeit from a construction standpoint, a minor structural alteration of size. But there it is itself, an alteration of size nonetheless, as well as what could be debatably discussed as intensities of occupancy, which was what was discussed during the remanded site plan discussion. Even if it's a minor, considered a minor intensity or even element of intensity, well, we don't have those thresholds described in the code, so it is more appropriate at this point just to default into major change. But the point I'm making here is that this is part of the original application process and complete application as it's described by state statute. So that's the way we're processing this, is that this is coming through under that original pretense, and they're making amendments to that. And it essentially says the review of these amendments, the land use authority reviewing an amendment may approve the condition, or deny that application for amendment. So in essence, we're still within that bubble, if you want to consider it that way. So that is maybe framing how we're coming at this amendment, where maybe in the future, we're going to look at this a little closely of how maybe we would handle it differently. But at the moment, this is not being treated as a separate application, as a separate process. It's quite literally within our drive and archive files bundled with what all of our approvals have been so far. I'll stop sharing this screen. I think that covered the framing I was hoping to cover about where we're at and what our authority is within these amendments. But then the question was referencing back to distances. I'll do my best to do that. I want to be careful about evaluating too much of previous approvals, as this is the approval tonight. I would like to focus on that, but if it's important to your determination, I think we can share those.
Well, I think in the interest of consistency, it's,
So
we don't want to question or approve something that will be inconsistent with the determination we made in the past.
So I'm going to try zooming into these. I might get a bit fuzzy, and if it doesn't work, I can extract that file as an image, and that should, yeah, it's gonna be kind of tough.
Yeah,
I
I mean, the whiteboard works too.
know, there's a place for a whiteboard. Let's start here, and if it's insufficient, we'll change gears. So this is the current site plan, identifying distances, and what will make this consistent is that the
current approved
main framing of the structures
site
has
plan
not
or the
moved.
one that we're,
This is the proposal.
Okay,
This
thank you.
is what we're looking
Yes.
at for improvement moving forward, but is my understanding the patios as well as the main framing of the dwellings is obviously not moved. It's only the balconies that are being
Mhm.
amended in this case.
This plan right here is what's on the ground right now, over there down the street. Is that what you're saying?
that is also correct, which is something else I wanted to
Yes.
talk about.
Yes, it is.
'Cause this is built, this isn't, we're gonna build, this is
Correct.
already, this is almost done. more or less.
Yes,
Correct.
So
For-
we're changing the site plan.
What is being proposed is an extension of a balcony. So their remanded site plan I wish there were.
Yeah,
I think
maybe
there's a
let's
comment.
start with what it was before we get to,
Let's see if I can make this work for us here. A nice, big, bright pink section. Okay, this might help us. So this, whoop, quite large, gets the point across. Of this section, this is the most southern main framing of the structure. You can see that the main framing of the structure on either side, it runs north, and then the outside units do run a little bit south, so they're midway. You can see my little cursor there. In fact, I'll try to do it. That's as far as I can go. I'm sorry, everyone. Carolyn's image is in my way. Not that we're mad about it. But here's where we're looking at as far as extensions go. Well, if it would stay put, I think we all get the idea over there. So yeah, again, this is the most southern southern piece of the main framing, southern wall of the main framing, adjacent to the south property line. Now, beyond that is what has been an amendment. So the remanded site plan took the balconies, they were extending off from this, and removed them. So that was what was approved. Go back. This is what was last approved, nothing there. What's being approved or proposed now at this point is to return those balconies out to 6 feet. Whereas my understanding that there are no other structural amendments being proposed.
what's being proposed is them 8 feet, actually,
What's being proposed as 8
today.
feet.
That the balconies are 8 feet.
There are other balconies that are further set back that are 8 feet. So if we see, it's hard to see here.
This is the new site plan that
Says
they're, it says 8 feet. So it was 2022
Hmm.
approval, 6 feet. 2023 approval, 0 feet. Today, 8 feet is what you're seeing.
Well, I think, and then 2022, I think was 8 feet, and I think there was an iteration of 6 feet at one point,
Oh, what's in the packet was 6 feet.
as historically.
Uh-huh, from
It
2022.
is hovered around those two, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't have the.
No,
exact
that's fine. I'm
numbers.
just looking at, at least
Between
looking at
those.
the numbers that are on their mock-up.
Yes,
It appears to be
And-
8 feet that they're seeking now for those southernmost
and we've,
edge balconies.
and the applicant can probably speak to this, but this site plan is the presiding document. Meaning in that there are so many iterations of construction plans, building plans, civil plans. Amending every single aspect was challenging. We tried to cover as many as we could, and we
Yep.
did reconcile some of the roofing and structural elements to that degree. But whatever is on this site plan that is A1 of the architectural site plan is the default, where all civil plans are gonna default to structural elements to this plan.
Mhm.
So if that is not the case, I'll let the applicant describe what it is that they are.
And that's, I feel like I had to figure that out because it's not in the narrative.
Uh,
Yeah,
Corey has that is the correct architectural.
okay. So they are, okay. Which is not the one that has been approved by the city, but is the one that they are proposing this evening. There's another one in there that was 8 feet for the recent iteration, so that's good to know. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the one I was looking at.
Little.
Yeah.
Very faint.
Okay, thank you.
And so, yeah, moving back again to what distances we're discussing is there's a 17-foot 5-inch separation from the property boundary to the main frame of the structure.
Uh-huh.
Currently, both the ground level patios and balconies are proposed at 11 feet 5 inches from the property line.
Okay.
8-foot separation, which is identified on one of these plans as well somewhere. Pardon? Luke? That's the 7-foot setback, but that albeit 1 foot off of that 7-foot setback that we're seeing right here. As far as the buffering requirement goes. So we can see as we look horizontally through this or into the landscaping plan, what would be included within that area.
Okay.
I know I fumbled through that.
That's fine, and that was,
But wherever you'd like to go from this point.
so to establish today, the structural setback is 7 feet.
Correct,
Nothing being proposed is within that.
correct. Well,
Did-
but by nothing, I want to be clear.
Well, the,
There-
the patios, the pony walls, like those kind of things.
Right.
Yeah, which
Right.
are non-structural elements, which is fine.
Correct.
But I'm thinking about walls, like structural walls,
And that's it. The
Patio-
structural
the
is where we're getting hung up.
decks.
Is
Yeah,
the pony walls,
Yeah.
separation walls, which are an acceptable landscaping element,
Yep.
are within that area.
correct.
But no main framing structure is within.
These
that buffer.
patios in any iteration are not within the 7-foot structural setback.
Correct,
Excuse me, the decks, whatever we're calling
Correct.
them.
correct.
But they are within the 8-foot buffer.
They are not.
No.
They are in neither. They would be within the 15-foot buffer, the old buffer, but they would not be within the new buffer
Mhm.
or the setbacks, nor were they within the setbacks as they were, which
Correct.
were still 7 feet
Right.
in the original approval. I just feel like those things are useful to establish.
Yes, I appreciate.
But yes, in the 2022 initial approval with the 6-foot decks, that would have been, the decks would have been 4 feet roughly into
Into the 15-foot.
the 15-foot buffer, but still not within the structural setback at the time.
Right.
Sure.
So a determination that we made in 2022 originally
Mhm.
is that while we approved that site plan,
Mhm.
we were operating under that initial assumption that the ALJ did say was incorrect, which is that the buffering, where the buffering starts is dependent on sort of a who builds first, and then it's from structure to structure instead of a hard property line boundary. So that has changed.
Mhm.
I think that would have been different.
Mhm.
I think we actually discussed that it would have been different. Had there under the buffers at the time been a deck in the buffer. I'm remembering that conversation. I don't know if others remember that too.
Right. And yes,
And in the remanded site plan approval last year, there were no decks within the 15-foot from hard property line buffer.
correct.
Correct. There were patios, there were pony walls, there was a gravel path, there were landscaping elements that we talked about. But we did not discuss whether or not a deck in a hard from the property line boundary buffer would have been acceptable. Because it was taken off the table. They got rid of those decks that
Correct.
would have been
And we
within
discussed,
that
like,
buffer.
The makeup of the patio. and
Yep.
We discussed the gravel path.
Yep.
We discussed the swales and the pony walls and whether or not we considered those acceptable on a buffer
Yes.
zone.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Which I think tracks with what the applicant is attempting here, which is to now revisit the issue of a deck. Now that under the new ordinance, if that were applied, it would not be in the buffer.
They're no longer held to that 15 feet. They're
Correct.
Held to that hard 8
Yep,
feet.
the hard 8 feet, that has some better defined elements that makes it a little clearer.
And if their site plan and all of that was approved with the rules that were in place, why all the changes?
I think because they want the decks.
Essentially, they're willing to open themselves up to bringing the rest of their landscaping and everything to the new ordinance in order to have those decks.
Correct. So that is the question, I think, before us. There is a bigger question that comes to me, which is, can the applicant pick and choose which updated post-vesting code they want to apply to their project, or does all updated code after they initially vested the project apply? Because there are other things that would apply to this project potentially.
Yeah.
I'm wondering
Staff-
if you can, genuine question, if that's something that an applicant can do without opening themselves up to having other things like the AEH potentially apply to this project.
Sure. That's a fair question. We've analyzed that through this process. It's
Uh-huh.
not new news to us.
Yep.
And I don't think we're prepared to elaborate on that question in that way tonight,
Yeah,
but I think we would be happy to provide the commission with a full response
yeah,
with Clayton being here and available to do that. But we are familiar with the way our code reads on that.
Yep.
And that was something that, Clayton was able to essentially describe. We have the plain language of the code. We can show you that to you right now, but
Yep.
how that is to be interpreted, because again, it's not perfectly whole in every subjective situation. So that interpretation element is what we have to wait on. I can
Yep.
show you exactly what the code reads as
Totally.
it is now.
totally.
Before I leave the screen, because I am going to take it down.
Mm-hmm.
This again,
Oh,
just
look
to
at this colors.
put the, yeah, very, very colorful. The pink is the property boundary. This is the 7-foot setback.
Mm-hmm.
This is the 8-foot current buffering
Mhm.
requirement, and this was the previous 15-foot buffering
Thank you,
requirement.
Corey.
So
That's
just in
helpful.
concept of where things were, had been, are currently. But I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing that.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Um, So,
Yeah.
I think it'd be maybe a good time to hear from the applicant and then open up back into full discussion. We kind of entered it a little bit into the discussion realm
Yes.
beyond.
Yeah, thank you.
uh,
Sorry, there's.
but I think Keith has made all the points that we had discussed, so it's not
Yeah,
totally out.
absolutely. There's definitely, would the applicant's representative care to come up and either address anything? I would say I know that you responded to the sort of statutory interpretation thing that Mr. Harger brought up. I don't see that as being a real issue.
Sure.
So maybe if there's anything, and that's me, if other people disagree, if staff would like to hear that, but it's also in the email that you sent, which will be part of the record. But I think it's more the why and the, I don't know. if
Mhm.
others-
why?
I just didn't want you to like waste time on that for lack of a better
No, I
way to-
appreciate that. And feel free to pop in with questions or anything. You guys are having great discussions. So
Yeah.
You're getting to all the things. I'm Christina Sloan. I represent the applicant. I missed all the excitement in 2022 and 2023 on this project. So
It was-
you guys know more of the history and the nuance of all that than I do, even getting up to speed. So they brought me on in fall of last year after the city adopted the landscaping ordinance, and exactly the why that, I mean, not quite, the why that Kaya explained, but they want the decks, but they want a better project. And that is indoor, outdoor living in Moab, and they liked the landscaping components as well. It's true that they got really excited. This was also before I came on, and they're like, yay, we love this landscaping ordinance. We get the decks, we will improve the landscaping. There was drainage that had to be done, and they started, they were passionate about complying with the landscape ordinance. So that came about quickly, and the city was like, whoa, wait a minute. And they were quick to comply and work with the city and understand the landscape ordinance and what the process was to go through this amendment process. I think major amendment, that sounds big and scary. It really isn't, right? So we are talking about these balconies in the middle on the upper. The landscaping improvements are dramatic, very expensive for the applicant to get to this place. Not just architectural changes, which were minor, but a lot of civil changes because the drainage really changed a lot, and the city drainage requirements are serious. And then also this stamped landscape architect requirement, which I think y'all should reconsider for projects of this size. But we did not ask for an exemption. We decided to comply even though we're right on the cusp because that's 6 units, I think. It triggers this
Mhm.
licensed landscape architect. So that was a big effort. But what we're talking about is improvements to the landscaping and all the water-wise requirements, improved and better drainage, and then this balcony change in the middle. And in terms of the primary structure and the structural elements, there's no change. The square footage of the units haven't changed. The location hasn't changed. The parking hasn't changed. These units are near end of construction. So this truly is about the developer wanting a better project that people want. The list prices of these are already out there. People are already complaining about them. It's not about the developer making more money or getting an extra unit or any of that. It's just about making it a better project that fits Moab. So that is truly the why. I'm happy to answer any of the other questions. I do think though, you know, as you guys discussed, that the objections of Mr. Harger are not new and the language in the ordinance has not changed. There is no, you know, what he is suggesting to restrict use in the buffer area and to require it be open space, empty open space is the language he used. That's a serious thing. The county can or the city can restrict use of property. You have to have a legitimate governmental interest to do it. And it has to be really clear in code. And your code doesn't do that, even with the changes, right? So it doesn't prohibit pavers. He objected to pavers. It doesn't prohibit gravel. These are traditional landscaping elements you see all over Moab. I'm happy to talk to the vested rights issue as well, but you know that you do get vested rights in amended site plan. I have a 70-page memo that I actually prepared on this in 2018 related to the tram project because the exact same thing came up. And I just sent this to Corey right before the meeting, but you get vested rights in all the elements that are listed on that site plan, and including here, the primary structure, which is already built. We already have vested rights in that primary structure. We already have a building permit, obviously, that's been long processed, and we're close to the end. So applying, for example, the 2022 workforce housing ordinance is, you can't impose that at this point because they're asking for a change to the buffer area. But that, I'm happy also to revise that memo specific to this project, but the answer is there for sure in that memo. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think my question would be, I think as Mikkel points out, the current approved site plan has no balconies on those couple units. However, those balconies currently exist on the project physically as it stands today. That is frustrating, I would say, just from a planning perspective, that the applicant, the developers, the contractors, whomever, went ahead and built something that was not in their approved site plan and then hoped that they could get it changed later on. I hate that precedent. I think it sucks. I think we have the reality of what's happening. I can certainly understand the developer perspective of like, we're planning to come into compliance with this ordinance that's now in the books. We're just going to go ahead and do things. But I also think it sends a bad message. And so I just want to like mention that I think we do need to be consistent with determinations that we've made in the past. That's our job as a commission, and this is an administrative action. And so I want to make sure that we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's that way. But that's frankly like bad form.
I can't defend that.
And that's
will
not your job
defend it.
too. That's not your job
Yep,
too.
I'm not the contractor. I
Yeah.
will say it's a balcony and it can be removed, but instead of removing it at the point the city flagged
For
it,
sure.
they're just like, let's just leave it there.
Yeah.
It's not like building over size or over height. And
Yes.
then they
Yeah.
got an issue that they're expecting you to fix it for them.
Yep.
This is not that situation.
Totally.
It can be removed.
Yeah, no, and that's totally, I just wanted to make sure that like we were flagging the fact that the balconies were erected illegally already, not according to their approved site plan, and that they are now proposing an amended site plan to bring the existing structure into compliance. Just so that we have that background. And let's see, what else do I have here in my notes? Yes. Thanks for your explanation. I think that, you know, wanting to have consistency with the units, have that top floor outdoor living space. I think we're all taking it seriously just because there has been such frustration on the part of adjacent property owners with having that sort of feeling of privacy violated by the development and sort of feeling like, you know, you can certainly understand how your adjacent property having a balcony be the closest thing to you as far as the space where the occupants of that adjacent building are going to be. It feels like it's sort of hanging over your life a little bit. And so I just want to make sure that we're like just taking that seriously. But we, of course, do have our duty to follow code and to give good reason if we decide that this isn't something that we are going to approve. We are the land use authority on this. So does anyone have any questions for the applicant's representative? But she's here. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Uh, I very much appreciate, obviously, your extensive expertise in land use law. Would love to see that memo, but also I feel like that is something that should come from the city's attorneys, that determination, and I'm interested in that. I would say my inclination right now is I think I would like to be really, really clear on that, how new code applies to a vested project with regard to any other existing vestiges. That's my biggest question. Like, frankly, I don't think if the new code applies, if they're allowed to apply the new code, that there's any issue with what's being proposed. Again, I'm frustrated that it's already happened on the ground. That stinks. But, you know, we're not,
That could be remedied though.
it could be, that could be. Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm frustrated by that, but it's not determinative of whether or not the outcome of what they're asking for can be granted or should be granted administratively. That's not a part of my decision, but I do think it's worth noting and just kind of saying that like future applicants, future developers, that's not really a great way to go about it. Even if it can be remedied and would need to be remedied if this wasn't approved. But I think that question is big for me, but I do think if the new landscaping ordinance conclusively applies, they're coming into conformance with every aspect of that, as they've already done, that having these balconies outside of the setback, outside of that buffer is completely fine with me, and I think conforms with the determinations that we've made already of what's allowed. It does not, reading the plain language of the code as amended, as the intent of the people sitting in this room who wrote it, is clear. I don't think that means we need to revisit the path or the pavers or the pony walls, all of which I think are still pretty clearly.
I agree with that. I don't think that needs any revisitation.
Just sort of like explaining my process here, and then others please jump in and do the same, but
You're saying the path can be in the buffer?
yes. As we determined before, I don't think the language of the statute has changed in a way that would make the path something that now would not be allowed in a buffer under the new landscape ordinance.
Correct.
Do you disagree?
100%.
All right, hit it.
A path is for use. And the intent of a buffer is to keep a use away, yes?
Well, what is the statute say? The new statute?
Can't quote the new statute, but I'm asking the question. The path is for use. And the intent of a buffer is for space, so how do these exist together?
So
Is it the way that they wrote the statute or the material of the?
by my read of the current landscape ordinance, the same as my read and our interpretation last year of the old landscape ordinance, or the old buffering language, I should say. Buffering is not intended to be an unever used space. The materials within the buffer zone matter. We determined that the materials are conformant with the statute, both as it was and as revised. And there's nothing saying that like you cannot use parts of your property if they're in the buffer. I would argue that having a part of the property that you're consistently occupying on a regular basis maybe would push that, but I don't.
Couple exactly what
Yeah.
you just said was part of the discussion.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
we reviewed material, use and intensity.
Yeah, that's what I mean by
In that
this
analysis.
would conform with the determinations that we already made last year.
Correct.
If I remember right on our decision about use and intensity, with what you said before, you can't, like a buffered zone does not require you to not use that part of your property. It required you to have those particular materials, and that we couldn't put a finger on, we couldn't necessarily determine how much use that was going to receive and whether or not that made it something that was concerning or something that needed addressing, because we can't tell you how much of your, yard to use and how many times you're going to walk next to your fence line.
Mhm.
And so with that being said, nothing in the language that we were reading gave us a good reason to say like, you can't put gravel near your fence line because you might walk on it.
Yeah, it's not being occupied by something. It's being used in a certain way. But it's like, I think this was an example I gave last year in my thinking. It's like you can drag patio chairs to the edge of your property and sit on your neighbor's fence line and hang out there every day if you want to.
Correct.
What matters is the permanent materials, the landscaping materials, and you're not putting your kid's treehouse that you need to get a permit for on the property line.
I think
But
Or you're not installing a driveway along the very edge of your property.
yeah,
to add to the conversation, I think Clayton Priest, our
yes,
attorney representative at that meeting specifically, I think gave great explanation towards that. So I think if, rather than trying to recreate all of this, that if there is some question in that, is to maybe re-review that statement that he made.
Yep.
There.
Absolutely.
Because I
Yeah.
think he was coming from a legal perspective. I think we all understand from a more human level of use and kind of what our feelings are on things. But I think ultimately we have to be very secure in what the property rights of that
correct.
development are and what the legal requirements are.
Yeah, and I don't,
Code.
with my existing home in city limits, it's hard to envision the city telling me that I could not put a gravel pathway along my fence line to access a part of my backyard.
Well, and to a point that you're making here is that if there were specific language that was approved the appropriate mechanisms and then installed and codified that did do such a prohibitory use, that would have to be profiled in the code. So
Yep.
the idea of we're generating an argument around intention of the code is like, well, I think that has some levels of conversation, but I think all the people that approved this ordinance were in the rooms for the intent of the ordinance. But additionally to that, it's what does the plain language of the code say? So if we had prohibitory language,
Yeah.
that'd be worth discussing. But the idea that, well, it doesn't say that, so why should we consider that it shouldn't have said that? That's an argument that I don't think we are able to go down. Correct.
Yeah, I would say that, so looking at the code here, buffer means a horizontal distance between adjacent uses or properties occupied by landscaping elements. Berms, swales, underground utilities, retention areas, screening, site obscuring fences, walls, landscape screening, or other features that individually or in combination reduce impacts on adjacent land use areas or uses. That is the squishiest part of that. That is still in there in the new landscaping ordinance, but we already decided what that meant in our interpretation with regard to gravel. No matter what the gravel was being used for. I think that's what's kind of important about that determination that we made. And I think my interest is making sure that we, frankly, is the exact same commission that we were last July. I think, yes, are still consistent
care.
with that
Anyway, close,
determination. Yeah, I think making sure that we're still consistent with that determination. And if we're going to change it, that is definitely something that I would want our attorneys to be a large part of. Because then I think that potentially opens us up to having made an arbitrary determination in the other direction. So I just wanted to flag that. But I would love to hear why you disagree. I think that's very important.
Oh, we don't have to hash that out now.
But no, I mean, it seemed like you, yeah.
To me, a buffer is there to leave space between the two uses.
Mhm.
And when you're putting in something that's going to be used, you're by definition removing the buffer. If you're putting in a path for people to walk upon, then you're taking away that space between the two uses. Now somebody's in there using it. You might as well just patio right up to the wall, right? What else goes in the buffer zone here?
Specific
It's-
to the
It's
project or?
specific to the project. It's the gravel and the,
There's
There's
some of
the-
the patio pavers are in the buffer zone. There's the little pony walls around the patio. Some of that is in the buffer zone here,
Those-
and then a ton of trees. More screening now under the new landscape ordinance than there would have been otherwise.
Right.
But yeah, those kind of things. I would very much, and I wanna hear from everyone. Carolyn, you as well. We have not forgotten you.
Yeah, I
Jill,
was gonna-
Miles, yeah,
I was going to say I appreciated Mikkel's questions because I was thinking the same thing originally. And I've got the language in front of me too, and it's that like reducing impacts on adjacent land areas or uses piece that seemed counterintuitive. And I think that we joined the commission in late August, so weren't part of that original discussion. So I appreciated the context and the explanation of how the thinking got there. And think it would be great to kind of like clarify the language there to reduce similar confusion in the future.
Miles, Jill.
I was just pulling up the.
Yeah.
Picture. of
is it
the-
normal for you guys to amend site plans like mid-construction like this?
Yes, I think depending on the project, the scale is obviously always variable. Most often what we're seeing, which why those tools exist, is for elements of construction that can't often be accounted for in a 2D perspective.
Mhm.
Meaning you run into some bedrock, you run into some drainage issues, maybe the way that your drainage was designed isn't laying out correctly, utility hookups aren't the same. So there's almost always minor or even sub-minor, meaning at the construction plan review level, aspects that aren't design standard elements that don't even scratch the surface of planning that are being amended. Even, materials of construction is always changing, of course. But those things usually qualify into the minor category, whereas let's maybe putting it into some perspective
'Cause that's
is
not what this is. This is them wanting to make some changes.
electing to make some
That aren't-
amendments,
Mhm.
sure. And that's part of the rationale, not exactly, but like I said, we're on this threshold of this where describing what the proposed amendments are could be qualified in both a minor and major review. When you read both of those statements together, it could go either side. But to give a little bit of scope to what a previous minor and major change was, is Lions back in 2002, not, as we're moving through this process, but them amending.
Thanks for picking a really non-controversial example.
I'm just giving scope, right? A hotel.
We're definitely in the paper.
Or a hotel conglomerations of suites, so detached structures to be reconstructed into a single hotel unit. The number of units wasn't changing, the number of units here not changing. So again, similar thresholds, that was determined at that time to be a minor change. Obviously, through the Wallingford case and even just rational review of that code, that was a major change.
Mhm.
But what we're talking about here is what could have been a 4-foot extension or what is now a 6-foot extension of balconies.
Yep.
And I'm not diminishing the neighbors' perspective on this, but in the scope of construction, this is minor. It is minor. I think Christina put it kind of into that framework. So I'm not diminishing the impacts of that it could have on the neighbor, but from a structural perspective, this is minor. but it does meet the threshold for major. It is changing and altering the size, just that simple. So of course, we're gonna default into what is probably the most conservative approach there. But just trying to keep it in perspective.
Thank you.
But yeah, so the original question, these amendments happen all the time. Very rarely do we get into major amendments, though. That is a little bit
Like
less
far
common,
in
little less, little less
Something that
common,
requires returning to us the land use.
little less
authority
common.
list.
Minor's pretty active, and then sub minor is
Every
definite.
dang day.
Every
yeah.
definite, yeah.
Um, return to you guys. I would love, if you don't have anything to say genuinely, that's totally fine, but just to open
No,
up space.
I appreciated her question because then I pulled this up and so I think it is one of those, I remember reading the minutes on this because I wasn't at that meeting, but I remember reading all the minutes and listening and thinking, I'm so glad I wasn't there. But, no, it is, I appreciate that with the addition of the balconies, even though I have to agree with Kaya that they went around about this the wrong way. Absolutely. Because I'm like thinking, aren't they already there? Am I wrong? But, I think that that's really the wrong way to do it, but we're gaining also some great landscaping. That brings that into the, our new ordinance of additional landscaping, so I think that's super helpful. So that's really all I have to say. I mean, it really is a lot about just adding the decks and approving that.
Yeah, and I think my sort of thinking, I did not explain this well, I'm realizing, is regardless of what we're gaining
Mhm.
and regardless of what they did incorrectly in the process, which was going ahead and illegally doing what
Right.
they're now asking for,
Mhm.
I would like to know the legitimacy and the administrative policy procedure, like for everything else.
For in the
If
future.
anybody, regardless of what the city was gaining and
Mhm.
regardless of what the applicant had done, if they could come to the table and propose to apply this new
Mhm.
standard to their project that is nearing the end of construction. That's where that rests for
Well,
me.
and you have to be careful of precedent you set for these
Mhm.
developers to
Mhm.
go, just
Mhm.
do it and
Well,
they'll
just-
figure out a way to
they'll-
make it
we'll
okay.
get around it, then
Mhm.
we'll easily get around it. That's what I don't like about this.
Well, I
one.
mean, that's the thing is like, yes, but there is no problem with us denying a project, denying a application like this in the future, even if the applicant at that time has gone ahead and done whatever it is, if we determine that they could not retroactively apply for that code change to apply. So that's where that hinges for me.
Right.
That wouldn't be an issue to say, no, you can't apply this standard to your project. You have to undo whatever you did on the ground. But here, if we determine that this is something that they can do and that us as the administrative body whose job it is to make sure that people follow the code, as written, as interpreted. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter if they've already done the thing unless,
It
because
still
that is,
needs
that is an issue for the planning department, not for us as the planning commission
Mhm.
Well, and
to
that was,
be punitive.
Mhm.
that was what I was curious about is essentially from an administrative perspective, I feel like we've gone through a lot of this. We've created findings. We've made determinations about what can go in a buffer zone. And we've had a lot of discussion about that and we've found some kind of something to agree on. And yeah, it's very unfortunate that they went ahead with some things that were not approved, but I don't feel like we have any recourse for that. I feel like the planning department does and the city possibly does, but that we as a commission,
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm.
yeah, it makes me unhappy, but I also struggle with the fact that at the end of the day,
They
I don't
really
think-
code.
yeah, I don't like if we're just looking at if they adopt the new code, are they doing the things required by the new code? And the answer is yes. And unfortunately, they're already doing them, even though we have not,
Yeah.
proved things, but
And frankly, I will say to anyone watching, listening, looking at this 10 years in the future, if they're trying to do the same thing, don't, because it's gummed up our analysis in a way that it makes this inherently seem suspicious and weird in a way that I think is coloring the objective decision making that we just have to do because we have to have this discussion. So don't do that. It's really, yeah,
it's much easier to be in support of something that I don't feel like our hand is being forced on.
yeah. And to be clear, I have, like Mikkel said, I would have no problem if this was something I thought we couldn't do conclusively, saying this and get rid of the balconies. If that's the determination, then that will be the determination, but I really would like the city's attorneys to take a look at just the framework of everything before we make a decision, because I think, again, unfortunately, because of how this is happening, because something is already in place, because there were the issues, I think unfortunately this is going to be appealed by one party or another, regardless of what our decision is, which is another really important thing about this process, this happening right now. And I want to make sure that we, as the planning commission and the city staff, are doing everything that we absolutely need to do and can do and should do, because of that is where I'm at. So I'm inclined to table it with specific direction to city staff and to our attorney to review those questions and maybe make a presentation on the procedural aspects of things. But obviously, as the project is nearing completion, this is a question that I think everyone wants answered as quickly as that could be done would be amazing. I don't know where other people are at. That's kind of where I'm at.
I absolutely agree.
I do regret not having the city attorney here to speak or more findings in that respect as part of this, just because I feel like it does have so much weight to it.
Yeah. And understanding that, Christina obviously has dealt with similar issues before, and, I'm sure there's obviously a potentially adversarial position that the city is in with the developer on this, but, for sharing resources would be useful too. So, but I do think it has to come from our attorney, just in good practice.
Yep. And I think that with these discussions coming right before the meeting, obviously our attorney wasn't able to accommodate those.
Yeah.
But that was our full intention and understanding,
Oh,
was
cool.
to supply you with those. We just couldn't do it in this meeting tonight.
Great. Are there any, so with that said, because we are the land use authority on this, because we do have to make determinations for specific reasons. I know Corey's been taking notes. Are there any other specific questions that either city staff, that the commission, I should say, would like either city staff to address if we table this, or for the city attorney to address if we table this, that haven't, I think, been written down by Corey so far?
I think you covered it.
Yeah, I think you covered it. I'm almost curious to know what you have written down, so that we can watch the jotting
Pop-
notes, but I
pop
just
quiz
want to make sure, what's on my mind is on your sheet of paper.
Yes. I think I've captured the discussion I have a lot of notes, but to shortly summarize is just to give a clear and framed response for vesting of property for all code aspects, and then different procedures when those amendments and changes are coming through. And I'm actually kind of adding a few additional
Yeah,
questions on from the
Totally.
back end side.
Yeah,
So we're
that
gonna
would be great.
provide some stuff that is a little bit more of a processing.
and
part for
frankly,
us.
just because we've not really seen that before, where it's come before us to make a determination based on, certainly projects and developments have sought to apply new code as it's come up, but not in a way that required us to determine if they could do that or not. And so I
Whole
just
new
want to,
approval.
I just want to make sure that we're really above board on that.
Mhm.
Just because that isn't something that I think we've dealt with in such an explicit way, certainly not with,
Yeah.
with people being opposed to that.
Right.
So,
And again, I want to point out that this is not an element that we were unaware of.
Mhm.
It's that, I think to your very point, we're being asked to respond at a much more formal level.
Yes.
So we want to make sure that is as exactly clear as it possibly can be. But again, the code is accessible to all of us right now. We can all read it exactly.
Yeah.
Problem with that is that we need to dive a little bit deeper into what that means.
yes. And then I guess my question would be, do we need to as a full commission, make a determination that the gravel is within the new,
I did have that as a note
Gen-
that we
yeah.
can. I don't know if we'll need to formalize it as elaborately as the findings and conclusions document we did in the last
Yep.
iteration, but I'll get response from Clayton on
Okay.
what he feels.
because if we need to do
Um,
findings and conclusions again,
Yeah, and this is where I'd I think we'll certainly reach out to Keith Harder between now and then.
Cool.
To get his clear point, because then that's what I couldn't gather exactly, is he was making a lot of what I might call softer, broader points. But if there was a particular element that he was contesting, that would have been an easy findings and conclusions. But I think it was more generally, I still don't feel that the path is
Correct.
permitted within the code.
correct.
And so I didn't feel if that's enough,
Yeah.
that we can just kind of refocus
Alluding to new language,
I
but
think
by
that can
my
be
read,
done
that language
at the
didn't
approval.
change.
I don't think
So-
we'll have to do that as
Yeah.
a second findings conclusions. I think we can kind of come in prepared for that
Okay,
at
great.
the next meeting.
Thank you. So that's what I would love to propose if the rest of the commission is on board with that. Tabling it with that specific direction to staff and the city attorney, and then sounds like conversations could happen then with the adjacent property owner as well, involvement of the applicants as well.
Could you speak to timing? Because the next meeting is Jeep Safari, spring break, for y'all, do you have a forum, is that where you're?
I'll be here.
I was going to recommend a special meeting
Okay.
prior to that week for that very reason, both not for obviously all of our purposes, but also for Clayton's and anybody else and the public's, that I would like to advance that special meeting rather than postpone it further than the regular meeting.
Yeah,
So it could be potentially, the whole week is maybe not great, but that only gives us 1 week from now.
Safari is that week of the 25th.
Right, so I'm looking to our community development director, what his thoughts might be.
Just about.
I think our attorney,
I think this.
Okay.
I think if it's acceptable, maybe we won't put a date on the table just now, other than that we'll try to advance this as a special meeting
Next week.
prior to what would
I'll
have
be
been the
around next
regular
week, the
scheduled
week
meeting.
after, so I'll be here.
Okay, next week.
Either next week or early of the following.
I would have to zoom in.
Okay,
on
and
a
that's
conference all week
that's an
next week,
option
and then
that
I'll
we can
be
accommodate.
That is an option.
over.
Thank you for demonstrating that option,
Yes,
Carolyn.
I see it's an option.
On rare occasion, totally acceptable though.
So Chief Safari is that week, their spring, I should say, importantly, spring break for the schools is that week of the 25th.
Mhm.
I don't know that. So now I know.
Yeah, again, it's not a public
Okay.
hearing. Notice requirements is not an issue. It's
Yep.
just a matter of having all the important people available.
Great.
So
Are
I'll
we just reporting on one issue, one vested issue?
All the things
yeah,
we
I
have.
think that yes, the vesting issue I think is the one that we're get the greatest clarification on. I think what we're saying is the plan itself stands alone, but we'll formulate the findings and conclusions for
The
that.
vesting
pathway.
issue and whether or not we need to do another findings and conclusions.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think that's all.
Or I should say probably for anything in the buffer.
Sure.
Again,
Sure.
At the end of the day,
In
the
the-
path, the
yeah.
papers, if
It's the
if
buffer
we have
that's
to go
the
back
issue.
through it, we need to go back through it properly.
mhm.
Can I just say something about the buffer?
Come on up. Yeah,
Since you haven't made the decision yet, I just.
yeah. If you would just introduce yourself,
Sure.
that'd be great.
Michael Black. I'm the Community Development Director. So I've been a Parks Director. The last 12 years I was a Parks Director, and when I see buffering and when I see passive spaces, they generally do include something like a crude path or a gravel path or decomposed granite, I think is
Mhm.
something they're using on this project. The other thing, so I consider it, I mean, just as a practical point, as a professional review, I would consider it part of a buffering, but that's really not the point. The point is, what does the code say?
Mhm.
And I think we've looked at the code, we've talked about it. And I think any code that would deprive its owners of use of the property is a code that would be invalid anyways. So I think the point here, as Corey explained, was to keep structures out. It definitely is a restriction of uses within the buffer zone. We can do that. But to say to a property owner that they can't access this property anymore because their presence will be a disturbance for the neighboring property owner, I don't believe that could even fly at all. So anyways, that's my point of view. But I wanted to start off with, I think gravel paths are part of buffering. I think they're very passive. They're generally not freeways or something that people use as transportation. They're just ancillary parts of a project that people use once in a while and provide a nice little feature within the development.
Mhm.
So that was it.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, okay, maybe I will just make a motion.
Sure.
Hold on. I'm still gonna use the first part of the motion that we could make. I move that the City of Moab Planning Commission, table the major change amendment to the approved remanded level 2 site plan for the Cottonwood Condominiums 2023 project on property located at 214 South, 200 East, Moab, Utah, 84532, to a special meeting, quite soon to be scheduled after this meeting with commission, and city staff, with specific direction to city staff and the applicant and the city attorney as to the additional information we need to make the decision, which has been indicated to the planning director. Is that sufficient? Cool. All right.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by me. We have a second by Mikkel. Any discussion on that or anything you'd like to change? Okay, Carolyn, you good? All right. All right, let's just do, all in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
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 Hi.
Okay, looks like all are in favor, all five. So no opposed and no abstaining. So that, is tabled until hopefully very, very soon, when city staff and the county attorney, excuse me, not the county attorney, the city attorney have chance to just look over those questions and get back to the commission. We can plan to schedule a special meeting in light of spring break the following week for our regular meeting. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to the applicant and their representatives, to Michael, city staff. Thank you so much. And then thank you again to the adjacent property owner, Mr. Harger, for being involved, weighing in and providing tons of information and insight to the commission. It really is always helpful. So, all right, what is next? Next, we have future agenda items. And this.
Right.
We're gonna have a special
I'd say
meeting.
immediately like this. No, thanks everybody for that truly deep and considered professional discussion. Moving forward, I'm looking to staff. We have a number of applications working through the process, but I don't believe we've gotten response submittals from them that would put them in the on deck queue. We have a number in the works though.
I think there is the subdivision, that was
We'll be
recently.
prepared.
Yeah, I don't see it being that hard.
Okay. And that could be, yeah, certainly not, depending on if we cancel the 28th meeting I think by 1st of April, we'll probably be seeing that minor subdivision application come through. We do have an annexation.
But that's, I think city council still has to.
They've already,
Once they accept it.
Okay.
Where's that?
what was that?
Where's that annexation?
South Main Street. Next to Pedigo.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Cool.
Have we not talked about this in pre-annexation discussion? I can't remember. It's been a while now.
No, we've
They've
talked
gone through
about,
pre-annexation, so.
we've talked
uh,
about the subdivision on the other side of the road, across from down from the Maverick, or up from the Maverick,
Yes,
on the
Yes.
Long's property there, but
so no, kind of a fun basket of everything from annexations, lot line adjustments, minor subdivisions, and a couple, maybe site plan or two coming.
We do have some major site plans.
Oh, and a
and
parking
everything.
exception. A
Mm.
parking exception that will likely be coming pretty quickly to you as well. Similar to that of our previous parking exception for the jailhouse. It'll be framed very similar to that. That'll be also a very fun, dynamic discussion.
A little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything's coming. It's, yeah, you guys had your couple meetings off, so now back to the grindstone.
To the grindstone.
That's right.
Understood.
all right. And then, major code revisions.
Yeah,
Just
this
other
is the
stuff.
calm before the storm.
Yeah.
Are you excited? I don't think that's hard. I think you shake it any direction and
It's a
deficiencies
ripple
fall out. Okay, I adjourn this meeting at 7:39 PM.
Thank you.
Woo. Thank you, everyone. That was,
For the colors.
oh my gosh, please take more. Really good discussion.
Thanks for the
Carolyn.
Zoom link. Bye.